You may have heard of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, but did you know there was a much more secret division of psychological warfare officers active during World War II? The Ritchie Boys were based in Camp Ritchie, Maryland, and were said to have been the main source of Allied intelligence during the war. There was much more to the Ritchie Boys than has been shown in media, such as the 60 Minutes documentary on them. This video will serve as a primer to understanding the Ritchie Boys and their vast contributions to society, and will highlight some of their deeds before, during, and after the war. The information in this video comes from a new book chronicling over 450 lives of Ritchie Boys. The Quiet Contingent, an addendum on World War II, the Boys of Camp Ritchie. So, who were the Ritchie Boys? Some Ritchie Boys came from prominent American families, such as David Rockefeller and Archibald Roosevelt Jr. Many others were recent German Jewish immigrants to the USA like Henry Kissinger, Henry H. Arnhold, and Klaus Mann. They were responsible for the capture and processing, including translations, of major wartime documents. So let's look at some of the men involved with documents. Frank Perls and Martin Dannenberg found the original copy of the Nuremberg Laws, and Perls remarked on the discovery that these laws were the reason his family had to flee Germany. The laws were also discovered in a lockbox that contained the family jewels of Count von Stauffenberg, who had been executed for his role in an assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler. The laws were subsequently delivered to General Patton and are now housed in the United States National Archives. Ritchie boy Kurt Rosenau was in charge of the Berlin Document Center and said, "We were overwhelmed by the mass of paper that came in before we actually knew what had happened." He stayed at the center until 1953, and it has been said that his team processed over 150,000 pounds of German documents. Arnold Weiss captured the last will and testament of Adolf Hitler, along with his marriage certificate to Eva Braun. This was after he had been tasked with capturing Wilhelm Zander, who had been the assisting officer to Martin Bormann, head of the National Socialist Party Chancellery. Zander had the documents on his person when captured by Weiss. Weiss would later go on to work on the Nuremberg trials, and after the war worked at the U.S. Treasury as general counsel to the Office of International Finance. David D. Silberberg discovered what is now known as the Windsor Files. The files revealed a relationship between the German government and the Duke of Windsor Edward VIII, who had abdicated his throne in 1936. Adolf Hitler had sent Joachim von Ribbentrop to form a relationship with the Duke. As such, an amicable relationship formed as the Duke was sympathetic to the German cause, and the Germans reportedly wanted to help the Duke be restored to the throne. The issue was not revealed to the public for decades. Wolfgang Lehmann was stationed as the officer in charge of the Vienna Document Center. Part of his task was to denazify the Austrian archives and was assisted by other Allied officers, which included British and French Army captains and an NKVD lieutenant colonel. Schaeff ordered Albert G. Rosenberg to compile a detailed, comprehensive report about the Buchenwald camp, now known as the Buchenwald Report. He held on to the documents for many years after the war, eventually giving it to the historian David A. Hackett. Hackett then published his translated work, The Buchenwald Report, in 1995, with a foreword written by Ritchie boy Frederick A. Prieger. In the last months of the war, Fred Gronick became one of the architects of the Hill Project, which established the GMDS, the German Military Document Section at Camp Ritchie, where seized German documents were processed and analyzed. Gronick arranged for many of these documents to be transferred from Europe while serving as a lieutenant colonel in Frankfurt. During this time, he also worked with fellow Ritchie boy Mark Mara Spiegel, beginning a long working friendship. Spiegel had also served as the chief of the Document Control Section in the operations branch of the G2 staff at U.S. Forces European Theater, USFIT in Frankfurt. Both men would later take high-level positions at the Motion Picture Association of America. Gronick was also known as the man who introduced James Jesus Angleton to Teddy Kollek, formalizing relations between American and Israeli intelligence services in the late 1940s. One of the members of the Nisei section in PACMERS was Ritchie boy Kazuo Yamane, who worked under Fred Gronick and translated vital information for the Allies against the Japanese war effort. Interrogations. Many Ritchie boys engaged in interrogations from captured prisoners of war up to the highest ranks. Some examples of these would be John A. Dalaboy, who assisted in the interrogations of Hermann Göring, Karl Donitz, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. Walter Hasenclever, while serving at Camp Ashcan, participated in the interrogations of Hermann Göring, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Robert Ley, Julius Streicher, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Wilhelm Keitel, Karl Donitz, and Alfred Jodl. Hasenclever would also later be the brother-in-law of Ritchie Boy Shepard Stone. Erich Albrecht interrogated Hitler's secretary, Christa Schroeder. She later mentioned him in her book, He Was My Chief. Kurt Korff also interrogated Goebbels' stepson, Harold Quandt. Henry Heckscher interrogated prisoners the Germans had held during the war, such as Joseph Muller, who had been a staunch opponent of the National Socialists and would later become one of the founders of the Christian Social Union, serving as the party's first chairman from 1946 to 49. Werner Michel interrogated SS officer Joseph Sepp Dietrich. William Schwarzer interrogated Otto Skorzeny. Hugh Iltis was said to have interrogated Heinrich Himmler at one point in preparation for the Nuremberg trials. Henry H. Combe interrogated members of the SS while stationed at P.O. Box 1142. The notorious propagandist Julius Streicher was interrogated by George Chrysler, and he had previously been captured by Ritchie Boy Werner Moritz. Ernie Blake interrogated Hermann Göring, Wilhelm Keitel, and Albert Speer. Adolf P. Schanzenbach also interrogated Hermann Göring and also typed the final indictments of the German leaders who were to be executed after the war crimes trials. John H. Slade participated in the interrogation of SS Commander Jürgen Stroop, who remained in prison after the war and was executed in 1952. Slade would later go on to a major career in finance at Bear Stearns and was known by his moniker, the Pope of Wall Street. Arnold M. Silver interrogated Otto Skorzeny, Richard Cotter, and Walter Schellenberg. Werner E. Stark interrogated Dr. Joseph Mengele in preparation for the Nuremberg trials and was unaware as to how the doctor managed to escape his captors and flee to South America. Kurt Klein interrogated Hitler's chauffeur Erich Kempka, who reported on Hitler's suicide and the subsequent cremation during his interrogation. Many years later, Kempka would pen a memoir of his experiences titled I Was Hitler's Chauffeur, The Memoirs of Erich Kempka. Ritchie Boy Gustav Gilbert also served as the prison psychologist for many of the top German command during the Nuremberg trials. Many Ritchie Boys contributed to the Nuremberg trials in various capacities like Gilbert. For example, Walter E. Menke joined the American prosecution team for the Nuremberg trials, both as a translator of German documents and as a consultant on German law. Otto R. Kunder was appointed chief of the War Crimes Branch Translation Section, which contributed 70 documents to the Nuremberg trials. Shepard Stone also secured document caches of the German Foreign Office that was to be used as evidence in the Nuremberg trials. After the war, many Ritchie Boys were involved in the de-Nazification of Germany, including Ernest F. Hauser, who later worked for Lockheed and was questioned by Ritchie Boy Frank Church as part of the Church Committee, Victor Brombert, who became a professor at Princeton University and taught in many institutions, Hans N. Speyer, who can be seen in the 2004 biopic about the Ritchie Boys, Hans F. Lozer, founder of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and known to have been placed on the enemies list of President Richard Nixon, Conrad Kellen, from the prominent Katzenelnbogen family, who worked with Radio Free Europe and the Hudson Institute. He also worked at the RAND Corporation, where he was a close friend of Daniel Ellsberg, best known for leaking the Pentagon Papers. Hannes Berger, who worked with Hollywood director Billy Wilder to produce the film Death Mills, a.k.a. Die Todsmullen. Eric Pleskow, who went on to found Orion Pictures with Arthur Krim, with some investment from Ritchie Boy John Kluge. Orion Pictures is best known for making award-winning films such as Platoon, Amadeus, Dances with Wolves, and The Silence of the Lambs. Ernst Kramer, who would later be known as the right-hand man of Axel Springer, and went on to be the CEO of the Axel Springer Foundation. Benno D. Frank, who served as chief of films, theater, and music for the Allied Control Council. Hans Have, who created 18 newspapers in the American occupation zone, and later became editor of the Neue Zeitung in Munich. Another major factor in the de-Nazification of Germany was a program managed by Ritchie Boy Shepard Stone, and this program was known as America Houses, bringing culture from the United States to Germany. Stone also covertly diverted monies from the Marshall Fund to pay for cultural projects, as did Ritchie Boy Michael Josselson. Stone, who would marry Ritchie boy Walter Hasenclever's sister, would go on to a long career in fostering new culture as head of the Ford Foundation, where he spearheaded the Congress for Cultural Freedom, aided by Josselson, who was working with the CIA. Monies for the CCF were also bolstered by the Rockefeller Foundation, which was linked to Ritchie boy David Rockefeller. After the war, many Ritchie boys went on to prominent positions in academia, finance, government, the CIA, business, and beyond. To learn more about the lives of these men, pick up a copy of The Quiet Contingent, available on Amazon.